Okay, so we can see a castle here that's hundreds of years old. Obviously, it wasn't built like this. So, what has happened to it in the last few hundred years? Partly, there have been people firing cannons at it, but also it's been broken down, it's been weathered away, it's been eroded. So, the process by which something over tens or hundreds of years gets broken down is called weathering and erosion. We're going to make a slight difference between weathering and erosion, but actually, there's a lot of things in common between them. Weathering is breaking down the rocks or whatever it is into pieces, and erosion is when it gets taken away. So you can see here that the rocks have been the rocks you see there in the picture. They've been they've been weathered, but they're still there in their place. The bits around it have been eroded and taken away. We often use the two words interchangeably. We're looking at two main types of weathering today: physical weathering and chemical weathering. Physical weathering is an actual movement, and chemical weathering involves something with the chemicals interacting. Anyway, let's have a look. Physical weathering, the most common that we're going to look at is something like this. This you see an awful lot of in places like Scotland. The reason it happens, there's a clue if you look at the back of the picture there. The mountains are covered in snow. This is a place where the temperature drops below freezing. And this kind of weathering you can only find in places where the temperature will go below 0 degrees and above and will fluctuate. And this is called frost wedging. And this works over a long period of years. And the way it works is like this: rainwater will get in between the cracks of the rock. There might be tiny cracks, but water will still get in there. When it freezes, it expands. I'm sure you all know that when water freezes into ice, it gets bigger. If you've ever tried filling a bottle up with water and putting it in the freezer, as it freezes, it gets bigger to make the top pop off, or if it's a glass bottle, it'll crack the bottle because ice takes up more space than water. So as the ice expands in these cracks, it pushes the rocks ever so slightly further apart. This normally takes decades. It can actually be quite fast. But you can see in the picture there at the back, the rock there has been broken up. The water's got into those cracks and pushed them apart an awful lot. This one is kind of similar, but something slightly different to frost wedging. Here we've got frost heaving. What's actually happened here is the water underneath the road has frozen and lifted up the road. This road actually exists. It looks like Photoshop, but the water underneath has frozen and expanded, creating those waves in the road. Another form of water, well, water. This is the most powerful force of eroding our planet, and that water itself, not just as freezing into ice, but actually by itself, the sea, the tides and the waves of the sea are incredibly powerful. This that you would have seen here in front of you would have been a cliff, a long continuous piece, but the water underneath has cut underneath it and cut and cut and cut until it's broken pieces off until it's created caves. So first of all you get caves, then caves will go all the way through until you get an arch, and you can see in the middle of this picture here there's an arch where the caves have gone all the way through. And then what happens is the top of the arch drops down. So there would have been arches left and right in the big gaps there now, but then the tops fell down until what you've got left is that island in the middle by itself. It's no longer joined onto the other pieces. And that's all been done by water over many, many years. This one's kind of obvious. You can see the tree has grown in that rock, and as the tree has grown over many years, the roots have gone into the cracks, and as the roots have grown, they've pushed the rock further and further apart. So, plant roots, not just trees like this, but smaller plants as well. The roots can do a lot of damage. You may have seen, if you've walked down a pavement and seen the pavement all lifted up because of the tree roots that have grown up and lifted that up. We've got one of these at the front of the school. Bit hard to see on these pictures. That rock is full of little holes. They have been made by tiny burrowing animals. There are animals that will actually eat the chemicals in the rock and burrow into the rock and create those holes. This rock looks a bit like it's gone rusty. And the reason for that is because it actually has gone rusty. Ferrous oxide, which is rust, is a mixture of iron interacting with oxygen in the air. This only happens when water is present, so if it's dry it wouldn't happen. This happens when you leave iron things out in the rain. It's not the water itself that makes it go rusty, it's the oxygen in the air interacting with the iron. And these rocks have got iron ore in them, and it's the iron that's gone rusty. And that rust then crumbles away and weathers the rock. Other living organisms as well. You can see plants here, but also the moss. The moss will have tiny little tendrils going into the rock and breaking it apart. It probably hasn't done all the breaking down of the rock that you see here, but it will keep breaking up the surface of the rock. This one here, this poor man with his face ruined, it's been done by acid rain. This is not just normal rain. This is something that humans have created with their factories and their cars. As they give out emissions, then this gets mixed up in the rain, the chemicals from the emissions, and then it falls with the rain and it can do an awful lot of damage. So in places that have a lot of factories, you might see a lot of this kind of weathering, where acid rain has fallen and actually eroded the rock there. Okay, let's move on to erosion. What we see here is the whole house has been undermined by the sea that's come in. And you can see this quite a lot in Britain. There are places where the sea is actually wearing away at the land and it's collapsing. So the sea has undercut this and washed away, and not only broken up the ground underneath the house, but taken it away, taken it out to sea, which is why all the ground there is missing. You can see how the neighbours have tried to fence theirs off to stop the same thing from happening. And again, the most powerful force for moving things, water. This whole valley has been cut by water, and the water has then taken the rocks away. So it's done the weathering and it's done the erosion as well, which is why I said there's a lot of overlap between the two things. So it's cut that whole river valley out and taken all the rocks away with it. Now, this is something you'll see a lot in Scotland. This is a U-shaped valley. It's a big, wide, flat-bottomed valley. There's a river going down the middle of it, but that river did not make that valley. That river is no way big enough to make that valley. And also, if it's a flat valley like that, it's not been made by the water, it's been made by ice. When rivers make a valley, they cut downwards and make it V-shaped, so the valley goes down and up. But this valley is U-shaped, that means down across and then up, and that's from ice. This is ice erosion that's done this. Glaciers, like the ones you see in this picture, have flowed down the valley. They've cut right through the edges and made a big flat-bottomed valley there. You'll often see these in Scotland and not so much in England, because Scotland was covered in glaciers maybe 15,000 years ago, and England wasn't. Only north parts of England were. So you'll see an awful lot of these. Sometimes, if the water gets blocked in, it'll create a lock, and that's why locks tend to be very long and thin. It's because they're filled up valleys which have been carved by the ice. This one is in a very different climate. You won't see this in Scotland. You can see the rock here has been undercut at the bottom. And this is a form of wind erosion, but what the wind has been blowing here is sand. If you know sandpaper, which is what we use to make wood smooth, if you can imagine blasting away at these rocks with sand in a sandstorm, like the one you see here, it's blasted away and taken out the bottom of the rocks there. And not really erosion in the same way, but I've included it here because it's a similar sort of thing. This is a mass movement, and this you can see here is mud. A mass of mud has flown down. This will often be the result of weathering or erosion. In fact, you'll often find that if there's water underneath mud, it'll actually make the whole lot flood down like an avalanche, and that has swamped these houses. Okay, and that's the end.